correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. Hey folks, welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. I'm here this evening with my buddy Steve.
What's up, Steve?
Hey, what's happening?
Well, not much.
Not much.
A lot of stuff, but not much.
Yeah, exactly, right? Isn't that always the way it works?
Yep.
All right, so we're going to do a podcast tonight. But before we do it... No, we're not?
Nope.
Okay,
no.
Bye.
Roll outro music.
Roll out. Shortest episode of Me and Steve ever, and the only one without a tangent.
I know. It's the only one we stayed on topic for the entire time.
All right. So,
speaking of tangents.
Yes.
Let's talk about the Order 66 podcast as our podcast of the week.
Okay, well, we can do that. And we can tangent directly from that into our topic for the week because they're kind of related.
Sort of tangentially related.
In Steve land, they're related.
Uh-huh.
In Steve's brain, whatever.
It's not just your brain. I understand why they're related.
So, for those of you who may have actually listened to the Order 66 podcast, unlike those of us who never listened to the Order 66 podcast, it is your one-stop for all things Star Wars RPG. The current version started some 9 years ago now, close to 10, when the old Order 66 podcast transitioned to the new FFG Star Wars role-playing game. So there's actually another feed with a whole bunch of old stuff about Saga Edition Star Wars way back. But they transitioned to FFG Star Wars and have not looked back. And there's 168 episodes.
Well, I think we need to say who also hosts this podcast, because I don't think you mentioned that.
No one's ever heard of him either.
Well, no, either of them.
Yeah. Yeah, no one. I mean, who's ever heard of GM Chris or GM Phil?
Yeah, no, never. Never heard of either of them.
GM Dave in the early days, and Hooley shows up sometimes. And
who?
Yeah, I don't know who he is either.
Oh, man. I was yelling at me radio.
But, and guests from all over the Star Wars gaming universe. It's a great show. And, to kind of, anyway, I'll put a link to the feed in the show notes and all that stuff. But this kind of ties into our topic of the week because figured we'd talk a little bit about campaign prep, which I know you're asking because I'm working on prepping a Star Wars campaign right now.
No.
And because it'll be the first time I've ever run anything in the FFG Star Wars game, I figured, what the hell? I'll go back and start at the beginning. Because when they started the new feed, it was with the beta release of Edge of the Empire back in 2012.
Man, that's a decade ago.
Yeah, well, but see, like the thing about it is, unlike if you go to listen to, insert name of podcast for insert name of system, if you go back and start at the beginning of the feed, they're coming at it fresh, like this is new to us. So you don't have as much of the, assumed knowledge of the system that you do in a lot of podcasts.
Right.
Which is nice. Like we're both familiar enough with the dice and how the system works, but it's nice to hear it when they aren't assuming that you've been playing the game for 10 years and you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, I agree. It's nice to be able to listen to a podcast where, it's just some people that aren't assuming that you know everything there is to know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so speaking on that, you were saying about you went back and listened to Order 66 because you're working on prepping a Star Wars campaign. So I think that sort of segues into our topic for the night.
Right.
Of campaign prep.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked a lot about prep and story prep and game prep, but I think campaign prep is actually a bit of a different beast.
Yeah, yes and no. and
Yes and
maybe.
yes. Yes and yes.
Like, and I think everyone's going to approach it differently. And to be fair, I don't know that I've ever gone at it this way before, although it's been years, not years, but it's been a while since I really, like sat down and went, okay, I want to run a campaign with, this stuff going on. Like the
Right.
last campaign I tried to work on was our ill-fated CP 2020 game, which I had an idea for, but it just sort of, between COVID and everything else, it just sort of bleh.
Well, yeah, and yeah, there's just a lot of things that went on with that, and I understand it. Like I said, I've run well now. If I can ever get back to RetroStar, I mean, life's been crazy, but we're gonna get back to it soon here.
Yes.
I've run quite a few actually campaigns since then. Of just I ran an ill-fated D&D campaign for a while. I ran a RetroStar. I ran Mutant City Blues. So I'm sort of fresh on the campaign prep stuff that you know
Yeah, and to be fair too, like the concept of the group where I'm probably going to be running this Star Wars was short campaigns. Well, that's not where my Star Wars idea is really landing, but what I'm hoping to be able to do with it, if nothing else, is do it in like, short chapters where we play a chapter, then we go play something else, and then we can come back to it if we want.
well, I don't mean to be rude, but and I don't want to speak for the group, but I know for myself, even if we run a little bit longer than I've been running on campaigns, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, well, and I know like a bunch of us, myself, Slappy, I think the other members of the group have all kind of been wanting to play Star Wars too.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
So it's yeah, I don't know. It is what it is, right?
It's one of those things where I think that it's probably going to be a welcome addition. But anyways,
So I don't know where you started, and like I said, for Mutant City Blues, Retro Star, and such, you were working intentionally with a pretty tight, concise little story arc that you wanted to tell.
yeah, I
I think.
Mutant City Blues, I started, of all places, I found this. Oh my god. Okay, you know me and inspiration from the outside world.
Hmm.
I found this documentary on YouTube about these people who run around in like flak jackets and motorcycle helmets that are all made up to look like superheroes and pretend to be superheroes, and just fell down this rabbit hole of this one guy who turned out to be a drug dealer. It was a whole thing. I'll have to send it to you if I can find it.
Is it sort of like cosplay gone wild?
Basically, it's these people that believe that they can stop crime, and it's like, yeah, that's fine. I don't have, whatever. But like, you want to help your city, that's fine, but it's just wild. It's just crazy, man. But that's where I started with Mutant City Blues. I had a different plan for Mutant City Blues. I was going, well, and you saw sort of by the end of it, I was going more NCIS CSI style. But
Mhm.
when I ran into that, I was like, nope, nope, that's where we're going with Mutant City. Like, I gotta go this way.
Mhm. And it was fun, and I at least missed some of the clues you had been dropping along as to who some of the people we had found were.
Well, and
But
some of that was you guys, not that, I believe that if you miss a clue, you can just fill in later. I don't believe in actually having to force feed clues to people.
mhm,
So some of that was that you guys just missed clues
mhm.
and didn't pick up on what I was dropping, and like didn't go back and really search and search and search.
Yeah, well, and there was also the one scene where we exited stage left that might have left a lot of hints to things. It didn't
Right.
really affect gameplay.
No, no, it didn't. And I believe in just, if you guys, I don't believe that missed clues should stall a campaign.
No.
And that's just a firm belief in my mind, is that just because your players missed the hints doesn't mean you stall out the campaign. You keep going with the thing that you had planned, and maybe you go about it a different way.
Mhm,
And that's all that happened with that game, was you guys just went about it a different way.
mhm.
But no, Mutant City was that, and then this Retro Star is just, I don't know. I didn't need source material for it.
Well, I know what your main inspiration is, and I don't wanna spoil it because we're at least tentatively recording it. Whether we actually ever release it or not is still up in the air.
Yeah, and I will say I took a property and spun it away in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's fine. That was just me being goofy and wanting to have some fun with a silly 70s action game. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know, and I think it works perfectly.
I think it does too. But where I always start with making my campaigns is with some kind of inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be a short story that I write for myself, because I have a handful of short stories that I've written for campaigns that are just nothing, just things that people are never going to see,
Mm-hmm.
or that I've only kept for long enough to maybe do the campaign and then get rid of it. But it's a lot of, it's like I'll write a story that sort of is the idea of the campaign, and then I just make the detail, like basically I start real focused in and then I
Mm-hmm.
start backing up until I reach a point where I feel comfortable going, okay, at 1,000 feet, my players are going to do whatever they want to do, but realistically, I can tell this story from this distance.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I start campaign prep. Like when I'm doing, especially story stuff, when I'm doing that, I start like way close up and then just start backing out until I reach a point where I'm like, okay, I feel comfortable letting my players loose at this distance.
Okay. So yeah, so kind of where I started with the Star Wars thing was we had kind of just been randomly chattering about what, and look, I've made no secret on the show or in our conversations or pretty much anyone I talk to that I've been jonesing to play Star Wars for a good long time, because the last time I played it was in like 1994.
Oh, sorry.
And it was actually my first role playing experience was, it was the old West End game, second edition, but it was Star Wars.
Right.
And and we talked about this a little bit with Hooli, and that Star Wars in a way can be intimidating because there's so much canon, and like we both talked about this, where that makes you hesitant to want to run something in Star Wars, where for me, for whatever reason, I get that sense, that feeling, that sensation, whatever, with like Forgotten Realms, where it's just like, no, or Dragonlance, or any of those big classic fantasy things. It's just like, but I don't want it. But Star Wars, I don't feel that way with, and I don't know. I think some of it is that with Star Wars, I'm willing to say, well, look, this is canon ish. I'm working off of a mixture of this, and this, but this is our game, this is our world, and maybe things don't go the way they did in canon after a certain point. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know. I've expressed that I don't feel comfortable running Star Wars. I'll play it.
Right.
It's whatever.
Yeah, and look, that's, I mean, that's a valid way to feel. I'm not, but like, so in our conversations, we're all kind of like, well, I'd like to play roughly, this era, and we kind of all found out that we're all kind of interested in roughly the same era. Clone Wars up through original trilogy, really is a fair way to say it.
I'll go past the original trilogy all the way up to the sequel trilogy, but I don't want to touch any of the sequel trilogy stuff.
Those movies don't need to exist, in my opinion.
Mm.
I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm not saying I didn't enjoy them to a point, but I would have been okay without them.
I'm not arguing with you, but I just know that they have their fans.
Like The Mandalorian is a wonderful series, but that's a very tight, separate story in its own way.
Mm-hmm.
I am curious to see if they do more with it, especially with the stuff with Moff Gideon and whatnot. But that's whatever. But we found out, okay, we're all kind of interested in roughly the same era, and we kind of want to do something similar-ish. Like, okay, so this gives me a rough starting point. Well, then, we start having conversations, and I've had, well, okay, so yeah, it gives me a rough starting point. So then I go in and I just made a Google Doc, and it's I just literally labeled it the Star Wars scratch sheet. And so I just started, I put down rough timeline that I wanted to go into, and kind of my base concept of, small group of space rabble that ends up getting into things, essentially, which I know is overly vague, but like none of us were terribly interested in like, let's play a rebel squadron, or whatever.
Mhm.
So I just started jotting down different stuff that like, okay, this is something I might want to use, etc. And then we started having conversations, and it's like somebody made a joke about, well, how about we do something like that? One episode of the Clone Wars where it's all astromech droids.
Oops, all astromechs.
And like, okay, that was a fun episode, but the logistics of actually playing an all droid party in an Imperial era are complicated at the least.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And not to mention the mechanics of just yeah. Yeah, you said that already.
Because the Empire considers droids property, not beings. So
Yeah.
they pull you over, so to speak. Well, okay, we're just taking you because, they slap restraining bolts on you and that's the end of the game. No one likes that. That's not fun. Um, and I'm sure there are ways you could, get around that, whatever. But yeah, it would be a fun, like a one shot, absolutely. Maybe a really short Super Outer Rim thing, but there had been interest expressed in kind of, the more intriguey, Rogue One, what it appears the new Andor series is going to be, that kind of stuff. So it's like, well, okay. So I had this idea a while ago that actually came to me based on there's the one adventure book, Beyond the Rim, which I think
Mhm.
our friend Tom actually ran an actual play of on Shared Sagas. And the premise there is that the party gets sent to some planet it's off hidden behind an some sort of weird, asteroid field, storm thing, anyway. And it's abandoned, or not abandoned, but this crashed separatist ship that they have to go rescue people from, salvage stuff from, etc. Well, between that and there's a little mini arc in the Rebels series, which you remember the one where they go and they find the crashed droid ship and they have to have the battle with the droids?
Yeah.
Well, the idea had come to me that that would be a fun, what do you want to say, reoccurring villain in a Star Wars game, is if you had this old droid ship that had been stuck somewhere, was just and then came back on, and now it's chasing your PCs around. Well, but then the idea came up of all droids, and I went, well, so what if we could somehow have a way to have the party like start off, so to speak, in media res, but in a fully narrated kind of intro scene, leave that mid Clone Wars timeline, and suddenly be 2 to 4 years before Yavin.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like just transplant from separatists fighting the Republic to the Empire kind of at its high point and the rebellion just getting started. And, what do those characters see in all this? Which is kind of a sandboxy premise, I get, but the beauty of Star Wars as a universe is that you've got all this canon media and material to give you the things that are going on in the background that you can interact with, as opposed to having to make it all up.
Right.
And so, like, what I've been doing is literally, like I've been watching Rebels, I've been watching the Clone Wars, I've been reading books, I've been listening to Order 66, and just getting ideas from this and that, and just kind of gradually building up my note pile. And then, I get an idea for this or I get an idea for that. And like, I don't know, part of it is I know myself well enough to know that if I try and write down a very, I don't even want to say detailed, but a more intricate series of events that I want to happen,
It's not going to.
it won't, and then I'll be disappointed and I'll get frustrated, and then it's going to hurt the game overall.
See, and that's why I have to do that I was talking about, where I start with the intricate details and then
Mhm.
back out and then back out again, and then eventually get to a point where I'm like, okay, now I feel comfortable where I can just let my players go, and whatever happens at this distance, I still have control, but also they can't like nothing can get changed too majorly.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, I think that's, like I said, for me, that's where, I can then, like I said, I can build out, these, okay, I have an idea of who I want my main antagonist to be, and some of the other factors, other forces, factions, whatever that I want kind of moving around everything, but I've got all this stuff that I can draw inspiration from.
Right.
And for me, that helps because then I'll get that and I'll go, well, okay, so, yeah, I want to do this, and well, I can use this little nugget and riff off of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it's literally just been like a process of adding notes, jotting down ideas. Okay, this kind of arc, this person, people are going to be, kind of your primary, at least initial. But then depending on how the players interact with all this, then I can have a lot of ideas to go to, like where I get what you're saying, and I think it's a very good way to do things. I don't know that I think that way. I think for me, it's much better to have a pile of loose ideas to be able to pick from.
Okay. That's fair. Everybody thinks about things differently, and that's absolutely fine. I just know for myself I can never keep a pile of loose ideas together.
It's what a Google Doc's for.
You know.
For me anyway. But see, then what happens is I have my pile of loose ideas, and then I look over my pile of loose ideas, and I start thinking about, well, if I did this, and then this, and so like as I get a pile of ideas, it starts building on itself.
Mhm.
And I don't know if everyone thinks that way or not.
No, I can definitely Lincoln logs some ideas together. That's not a problem.
Mhm.
Like I start getting one idea and I'm like, "Oh, what about this?" or "Oh, what about that?" or "Oh, what if this?" And yeah, I've done campaigns that way. When I do my no prep campaigns and systems that I know like the back of my hand, like
Mhm.
if I'm running Cyberpunk 2020 or if I'm running D&D, man, my no prep stuff sounds just like that. Like it's a handful of loose ideas that all compound off of each other, and whatever happens because I trust that my players are going to know what's going on, and I can tell whatever story comes up off the top of my head. And just, yeah, that's when I run a no prep campaign, that's where that comes from. Like, oh,
Mhm.
I've had this idea for a while, or oh, I've had that that storyline for a while, or oh, this character, I've had them for a while.
Mhm.
And that's where that stuff comes from. So, do
Yeah,
you prep characters in your campaign prep? Do you make characters in your campaign prep, I should ask?
as in like NPCs.
Yeah.
I have not started doing that yet. I should fairly soon, at least kind of like the big pieces.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like,
Do you just sort of write down like X type of character or character that does X? Or do you actually name them and, well, I mean even farther along, do you actually name your characters and do all that fun stuff?
sometimes,
Okay.
like like, kind of a lot of times what I'll do is, and I do a lot of this, like, while I'm driving home from work,
Mm,
I just
mhm,
start thinking of names, and I have really weird, like, for example, in the Genesis game that we played, the character I played, his name was Jensen Carlisle.
mm.
You know where I got that name?
No.
Off of 2 different tractor trailers I passed on the way home from work the day before I made it.
Hey, whatever. I'm bad with names, and you know this. I just start throwing out names, and whatever sticks. I end up writing names down.
That's kind of the other thing that I do is I just come up with names that I think sound cool,
Mhm.
and I just throw them in a list. Like
Mhm.
I've got a couple of names in my Star Wars scratch sheet that I think this is a cool Star Wars sounding name, and then I may assign a role to them, or it may just be there for me to pull out for something I need.
Right.
Kind of like I used to listen to a podcast that they literally had, and it was kind of a thing they did with their Patreon and whatnot, where they had a name bucket, and when they needed a name for an NPC, they just reached in the name bucket, and their patrons could like submit names and whatever. And
To call it out, but wasn't that Terrible Warriors?
No, though at least not. I'm thinking this was called Hapless Heroes.
No. Because I want to say Terrible Warriors was doing that too.
I know they used to name NPCs based on patrons.
Yeah. Okay. So they just didn't have a name bucket. Yeah. Gotcha.
Was like I said, there's a podcast called Hapless Heroes, I think.
Yeah. I just know that our friend Justin, because I was listening to the cult and the cult playthrough they did, and I was like, yeah, I remember them saying about naming NPCs and feeling bad about it.
Yeah, but like so for me, again, this is where I could just start getting a list of names that I think sound cool, and then I have them, and I can go, okay, I need a I like the sound of this name in this role, and it's just for me, it's because I have trouble sitting down and focusing on anything specifically, and so
Mhm.
this is for me. This is kind of a way for me to, I don't want to say harness my lack of attention span, but sort of work with it, if you will. And that's where
Coping.
this pile of ideas concept for me, it's, I got an idea, let me put it in the pile.
Mm-hmm.
Because I get these ideas, and this is again where I use a Google Doc for it, or sometimes I'll scribble stuff down on a notepad, and then I take the notepad and modify, transcribe it into my Google Doc. But I can access my Google Doc from my phone when I'm at work or wherever. And so it's a way for me to not lose the ideas, but then I'll also sit down sometimes and go down rabbit holes. Like I'll finish editing an episode and then just start reading random articles on Wikipedia,
Mm-hmm.
and go, oh, well, that's interesting. Oh, I could use that. You know what I mean? And so I'll make a
Yeah.
little note about this thing. And I think for me, like I said, part of it is because I'm very unconfident in my ability to write a good story arc. I more want to have a bunch of ideas that I can have rolling around, and then based on the feedback I get from the players at the table, I can then grab one of those ideas and roll with it. And I don't know if this is me giving bad advice, if this is just me talking about, the reality of how I do things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's bad advice, and I don't think you're doing anything wrong. I think you just need to, and this is just my personal opinion, I think you just need to get a little bit more confident in your story arcs.
This is probably extremely true.
And I'm not trying to be, disrespectful or anything, but I think that's just
No.
something that we all have our weaknesses. I know I have mine, and I know that that's just something, one of the things that I had to get over was the feeling that, oh man, I don't know that I can do story arcs very well. Well, I had to learn that the hard way and get over it, because for the first, I don't know, 6 years of gaming, of my gaming career, I was the perpetual GM.
Mhm.
So I had to get over the feeling of I'm not good at story arcs, because I just had to do better.
Yeah, well, and see, like, when I so my first experience running games was running Rifts in college, and I've told you a little bit about it, but initially it was just, "Oh, heck, what seems to be fun to have them run into today?" And we would just do stuff, but I didn't at the time, I didn't understand that it was supposed to be some sort of grander thing.
Well, and that's the beauty of Rifts, though, is that it doesn't have to be a grander thing.
Right, but
You
I
could play Rifts
remember
Monster of the Week.
one of my players said to me, he said, he said, "This is a lot of fun." He said, "But I don't think I've ever played a campaign where there wasn't like a bigger overarching thing." And I went, "Oh." Like that was the point at which the light bulb kind of clicked and went, "Oh, you're supposed to do that." And so it's a weird thing, and I don't know if, like I said, I feel like I get good concepts, but I'm afraid to try and nail them down too much, because I'm afraid that then I'll either get very railroady, or I'll be going, man, I had this whole big thing planned out and they went that way.
Well, and I think some of that comes to the idea that do that bucket of ideas thing, but do it with your big concepts too.
Hmm.
Don't just do it with your little stuff, right? because like the little stuff's easy. It's easy to be like, whatever. We're on Coruscant rather than Naboo, right? Whatever.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter what that changes. The bigger stuff, you need to be able to comfortable to do that with it too. Is to be able to go, oh well, they went left and missed this entire plot point. Well, that's okay. We're gonna change the story completely.
Right. And I think I'm afraid of me getting flustered by that, and so, in a sense, I hide that by not making those plans.
Yeah.
And, hey, look, if you wanna call it the Me and Steve confession hour this week, I don't know, but
My thing is that I don't know. We face our troubles maybe differently then, because I faced that shit head on.
yeah, well, see, the other
I
thing
I
that's
grab the bull by the horns and go, you didn't like it, too bad. Like, tell me, I'll gladly try and fix it. But I don't get. I used to get upset when my players would be like, we don't like this. I got to a point where I'm like, no, I realized that as a player and as a GM, the fun part at the table is that everybody's having fun.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's nice to be able to tell your story, but if your story is in the way of the players telling their story, there needs to be concessions made.
Right, and I fully realize that, and I guess what I'm, so to speak, trying to keep myself from feeling disappointed and then getting angry about it, which I know is
Yeah.
kind of immature, but
No, I understand. Hey, that's what happens. I get it. I think that I think that's just one of those things where you need to be again, you just need to go, okay, well they didn't do this story. We'll do a different story and I'll keep that one in case something else pans out. Maybe I could run that in a different campaign, in a different system, in a different whatever.
mhm.
I think that's just one of those things where you just need to not to tell you what to do, but just to sort of like accept the fact that, okay, well, it didn't work this time, but maybe it'll work next time. Maybe I can get a different group of players interested in this thing that this group of players didn't latch on to. Because
Yeah.
trust me, I've had a lot of stories where the players did not latch onto the thing that I was trying to get them to latch onto. I've
Mhm.
had many D&D games where it's like, well, the farmer's wife is over here and she keeps calling for help, but the players are going that way. And they're not stopping to find out why the farmer's wife's calling for help because one of the players lost their checkbook to a thief that robbed them three towns over. Like, it's one of those type things where it's like, okay, well, there goes that story. I'll just put it on. I have it in notes. I have it in that. I have this composition book. It's full of stuff like that. I have it in
Mhm.
notes. If we ever play again with new characters, maybe I'll bring back that story and just change it slightly.
Mhm.
Just because the name of
Yeah.
the town's changed doesn't, you know, just because the name of the town's changed doesn't change anything.
Yeah. No, see, and I guess too for me, I sometimes have a really weird disconnect between things that I know and how I still react to them regardless of the fact that I know things.
Right. No, I understand where you're coming from.
This, dissonance of I know that's what I need to do, but and I also too
I
like
Yeah, that's what you need to do, but you're also going to react poorly to it. I got you.
yeah,
I get it.
I'll be completely honest. I know the Cyberpunk 2020 game that we've talked about that I had I don't want to say the perfect storm of things to sink that campaign, but there were a lot of factors that created that campaign's dissolving that were way outside of my actual
Oh yeah. Well, and I don't mean to call anybody out, but we had a player that didn't have the entire concept of cyberpunk. We had players that were almost new, almost completely new to tabletop RPGs in total, like outside of D&D. We had a whole confluence of things, and then COVID,
yes.
and COVID is not not one of the things that you can. But yeah, it was a whole confluence of things that just went wrong with that campaign. And I understand that you were like, no, I'm just gonna like I'll sink this ship myself because this didn't go the direction I want. I've done that
Yeah,
too.
well,
But
and
I mean,
yeah,
it's one of those things where you have to be having fun too. And I know I said, throw things out the window for the sake of the players having fun. But if you're not having fun and if you know that it's really going to bother you, Hey, sometimes it takes throwing the baby out with the bathwater and starting over again. Like, honestly.
Yeah, but there was a part of me that really took that there were things that I didn't do the way I should have, and that really is what caused everything to not go the way I wanted it to. And
Well,
I I can look back and go, "Okay, maybe had I done this or this a little different," but in the grand scheme of things, I don't
I think
did I do everything perfectly? No.
no. I think in the grand scheme of things, everybody walked away from that campaign having a good time.
Yeah. And well, that was the weird part of it.
Well, that's just we've talked a lot about being adaptive. Well, you just got
Mhm.
to be adaptive. When the players are having fun and you're having fun, there's nothing wrong with that. And if it means that, oh, I didn't get to the story I wanted to tell. Okay, I mean, maybe you could try and if the campaign runs longer, you can try and incorporate it into that, longer running campaign. If it doesn't and you can't bring it back around, sometimes it takes like with your murder mall thing, I think that would have been a lot of fun if we'd went to sleep one night and woke back up in the murder mall and just
Mhm.
kept having to do it over and over and over and over
Well,
again.
yeah, and so part of what I anticipated happening was that you guys as PCs would seek to find out who was behind that.
So I
And go ahead.
no, I think the reason that fails, and I don't mean to tell you, I don't mean to be rude, but I think the reason that fails is because it's cyberpunk. And so the players and the player characters can just sort of assume that it's some evil corporation and it's just some, dickhead being a dickhead.
Mhm.
And so it's like, well, we're going to go back to life now because this is kind of a normal thing in the cyberpunk future that it is.
Fair. That was okay, so, yeah, I miscalculated that, but, like, I even tried to kinda, like, prod at you guys a little bit to push you in that direction, and it didn't seem I don't know if I wasn't prodding hard enough or obviously enough.
I think it's a little bit of prodding obviously and prodding hard enough. I think you prodded hard enough. I just don't think you were clear enough about it. Because I know
Okay.
what you're talking about. I just don't think you were because sometimes and I do this myself, and this is where I ran into my first hurdle with the Mutant City Blues game is that I realized that I don't how do I want to say this? Clues and ideas that you think are absolutely obvious are not to the players because they're not in your head.
Yes.
And so, and I say this with all due respect, and I've played with a lot of really smart players, but you really have to dumb things down for even very smart, experienced players.
Mhm.
Because in your head, you're going, oh, this makes perfect sense. They're going to go, they should go this direction. The reason they're not going that direction is because you don't have all the clues that you have in your mind out there,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like you have to really, in my mind at least, you have to really lay things out for the players and be like, X is at Y location. Maybe you should go and investigate, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think actually I wanna say the last session of that we ran, was that the one where I did the interview thing?
Um, I don't know.
Because I actually took and adapted a little thing out of a scream sheet in the back of the book and kinda grafted it into this thing, and I think that was kind of finally starting to push you guys in the right direction, but I think that's when COVID happened, and then it was just like, at that point, I was frustrated and down on myself, and
Yeah,
it was how long, and I'm like, "You know what? Never mind."
yeah, exactly. No, I know the feeling. Trust me, it's not easy. It's not easy being, proud of yourself all the time. It's not something that you should be, but it's like it takes a little bit of effort to get used to like just accepting whatever happens.
Yeah, well, and, like, for me, part of it too is, like, I find myself, especially doing the podcast, it's like, well, I know all these things that I should be doing,
hmm
and I'm trying to do
Applying them
them.
is the hard part.
Yes, and, like, uh, whatever, like I said, confession hour. Look, it's easy to say you should do this and you should do that, and saying that, I'm also very aware that it's easy to say it. It's not always easy to put it in practice.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, I trust me. I get it because there's stuff that I do all the time that I'm like, man, we're just talking about this on the podcast. I need to stop doing this.
Well, I'll call myself out. This was back, oh geez, I don't know, year and a half ago. I ran a one shot at Delta Green for some people on the of our Discord server, and Agent Zero, who we ended up later playing, Genesis with and everything else.
Hmm.
At one point, I did something. I called for a roll for something, and then everyone failed.
Hmm.
And he kind of goes, "Hey, weren't you just saying something on the podcast about sometimes not making people roll for something?" And he wasn't trying to be smart about it or
No, he
anything.
just was like, hey, you're just talking about not doing frivolous rolls.
Yep, exactly. And I just did it.
I've done
You know,
that. Yeah. No, when we were playing Mutant City Blues, like one of the first rolls that I made you guys do, I was like, I don't have any consequences for this. I need to not do this roll. Because I think I said make a roll, and then somebody was like, for what? And I was like, you know what? You're right. Never mind. Don't worry about it. Because you just don't realize that when you don't have consequences for something, it's like, this is a fruitless roll. This is a frivolous roll. And it's
hmm
tough. It's hard. So I
Yeah.
trust me, I get it. It's not easy to always apply your own advice,
Oh gosh, no.
but sometimes you got to take your lumps. You got to learn
Yeah.
learn your lessons and take your medicine and take a lump every now and again and keep moving.
Well, I think we all have our things too that we know better, but we keep making the same mistakes anyway. And this isn't at all RPG related, but I'll tell you the one that I do to myself all the time. If I'm doing something with metalwork and welding, I know that after I weld it, it's hot, so I don't touch it. Okay? I know that, and I'm good about not touching it hot after I weld it. You know the one that gets me all the time?
Grinding.
When I'm grinding the welds down, I
Yep.
go to feel how smooth it is.
Yep. I do that.
I have burnt my frickin' fingers so many times doing that.
I burnt myself on my mower blades the other day because I was sharpening them. I wanted to check to see how sharp they were.
But that's the one, like I said, I don't know how many times, and yet I know that when you
Yeah.
grind it, especially if you've been really hugging on it, it's
Uh-huh.
hot. But every
Mhm.
time I go to see how smooth it is, ow!
Yep. I was making soap today, and every video that you watch of soap making is like, now your lye water solution is going to be really hot. Well, guess who was like, all right, it'll be fine. Nope. I don't have any serious burns or anything, but I was like, I went to start stirring it, and I was like, damn, that's hot. Like,
Yeah, and yeah.
no, I get it. Yeah. And I'm sure our audience will appreciate us being like, no, but like we screw up too. We get it. It's fine.
Oh, and look, I mean, it says it right in the thing for the. Are we experts? No. Look, I'll be the first. I listen to a lot of people who are very smart around RPGs, and a lot of what I say on this podcast is stuff that I've heard a lot of
Other
people
yeah,
who are a
other
lot smarter than
smarter
me
people.
say.
Yeah. I can't remember the number of things I've repeated Robin D. Laws say. Like,
Yeah, Ken Height and Robin Laws, man. Ken and Robin talk about stuff is an amazing podcast.
and I'd love to have either one of both of them back on. Like, I know we haven't had Robin, but I'd love to have Ken back on.
Yeah, we should try and figure out a way to do that at some point.
There's a lot of people. Look, if GM Chris is out there listening, I want to talk to you, please. I'll set aside a Saturday if I have to. Just come on, man.
Yeah. Chris is a busy man.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. But I think we've touched on some pretty serious topics, and we've talked about campaign prep, and we've gotten very deep. But I think it's time we get into Game of the Week.
Game of the week. Woohoo!
Game of the week. Game of the week.
All right. Who goes first?
I can go first.
Okay, you go first.
You go first.
Okay. I don't think you've used this one before.
I swear, if it's the
I
one
found
I
a
have
game today.
go for it.
It's called Meddling Kids.
I don't think I have.
Okay. So as you might guess, and here let me link it to you. But yes, it is very much what you probably are guessing from the title. Meddling Kids is a role-playing game aimed at players from ages 7 and up, perfect for anyone.
Oh yeah, no, I haven't used this one.
It is the theme of the game is simple: a group of kids and their anthropomorphic sidekick friend that we'll call the wild card have to solve mysteries or save the day. You've seen this model before in countless television series, blah blah blah. Yeah, so this is Scooby Doo, Speed Buggy, classic. What were those all Hanna-Barbera shows?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so this is very much well, it's not Scooby Doo, but it is,
Yeah, it's a Scooby-Doo-esque story.
But I like the fact that it's also intended for kids.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with a kids game. That's pretty cool,
Yeah.
actually.
And, it's fairly small, not quite 100 pages, no print on demand options, but the PDF's only going to set you back $5. And it's actually, I'm surprised this is 10, 12 years old.
Oof. Yeah, it looks looks decently.
Yeah, I mean, but look, we all know how that works.
Oh, yeah.
We all know the tropes, and it looks fun. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's all you need. It says each adventure should take less than an hour to play, so making it easy for young minds to stay focused. Or the Steves.
That's how long, less than an hour. That's what my RetroStar games have been hitting. I'm hitting like a solid 45 minutes.
It's called Meddling Kids.
That's cute. I like it.
Yep.
I have one that I stumbled
Okay.
across by Osprey Publishing, and it's a game called Grand Mechanismo. It
You wanna
is.
shoot me a link?
Yep, here we go. All right, computer's running a little slow. Brain's also running a little slow.
Okay. Grand Mechanismo.
It's 1510, and one has to wonder how differently history would have been if you could have played out Machiavelli. It is, in the book, it's advertised as a cyberpunk role-playing game in Da Vinci's Florence. It is a swashbuckling adventure in Renaissance Italy, where Florence's winding alley plays host to spies, scholars, and sellswords alike. Players are nobles, mercenaries, inventors, and artisans who find themselves crossing wits with Machiavelli. Just looks really cool. The pitch of playing a cyberpunk game, like the idea of a cyberpunk renaissance, I love it. I
was just say, yeah, it's like a Renaissance steampunk, cyberpunk, whichever. Yeah, that looks like it could be really, really fun. It'd be really. I know I could have fun with it. I don't know if my brain would grasp it well to run it.
I have a couple ideas because I was a huge, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an inventor, and so I was obsessed with people like Nikola Tesla and Benjamin Franklin and Leonardo da Vinci. So I have a stupid amount of knowledge on on these people, and especially Da Vinci, because I was obsessed with Da Vinci because I read the Da Vinci Code and was like, yep, I want to learn more about this goober.
No, I think this would be. It sounds wonderfully interesting.
Yeah,
Especially with the kind of historic tie-in.
Yeah, and I think the idea of a historic cyberpunk kind of tickles my fancy. Like not steampunk, because steampunk's its own flavor. Like a historic, set during the Renaissance, and it's cyberpunk. Like I don't know, that just gets me.
Yeah, clockwork something.
Yeah.
Like cyberpunk for me involves, and I get that for the era this was incredible technology, but I don't know, there's something about flickering fluorescence and neons in cyberpunk in my head, and I don't think but that's just me being semantic and whatever.
No, I get it, dude. I understand, but
I like the concept. I don't. Yeah,
terminology.
I'll shut up now.
I got you. No, I get it. Terminology's hanging you up there a little bit. It's fine. But yeah, with all that
that's
being
brand
said,
new too.
Yeah, no, yeah. It just came out on the 18th.
Yeah.
So, but with all that being said, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for the day. As always, links to everything are in the show notes. Patreon, Discord, Facebook, Twitter, all that fun stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, and we want to remind you to be kind to one another and get out there and play some RPGs.
Take care, y'all.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter at @andrpgs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast, on Discord at Me and Steve RPGs, and as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.
For those of you who may have actually listened to the
The what?
Okay, that'd be that. That went a little more introspective than I intended it, but hey,